In the dark, early morning of October 12th, 1984, a powerful bomb detonated within Brighton's Grand Hotel, unleashing absolute chaos. Ceilings and floors gave way, hotel rooms were blown apart, and sleeping guests were violently thrown from their beds. The primary target of this assassination attempt, staying inside the hotel that night, was none other than the British Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher. While 5 people lost their lives and dozens more were wounded, Thatcher, incredibly, emerged unharmed. In this episode, we'll explore the motives behind the IRA's plot to kill Thatcher, delve into the construction and placement of the bomb, and recount the events of that terrible morning. To understand why this happened, we first need to look at the ongoing conflict known as the Troubles. By the beginning of the 1980s, the violent struggle over Northern Ireland, famously called the Troubles, was raging. Factions like the Provisional IRA were using armed conflict in their fight to remove British authority from Northern Ireland. In response, the British government used its military and harsh political policies to suppress the uprising and hold on to power. British troops became a common sight across much of Ireland, tasked with neutralizing groups like the IRA. However, tactics like torture and infamous events such as the Bloody Sunday Massacre showed the brutal lengths the government would go to in order to assert its dominance. The IRA, in turn, carried out a bombing campaign across England, attacking city centers and symbolic government buildings like the Old Bailey Courthouse. When Margaret Thatcher rose to power as Prime Minister in 1979, she immediately instituted an uncompromising policy against the IRA. Her government ramped up its intelligence-gathering efforts, firmly refused to engage in any talks with paramilitary organizations, and denied political prisoner status to captured IRA members, classifying them as common criminals. The situation reached a tipping point in 1981 with the hunger strikes in Northern Irish prisons. Imprisoned Republicans began refusing food, demanding to be recognized as political prisoners. Thatcher's government would not concede, and in the end, 10 of the hunger strikers died, including Bobby Sands, who had been elected to Parliament while starving himself. Among Republican sympathizers, Thatcher became the face of British intransigence and their unwillingness to listen to their grievances. She was viewed not just as an adversary, but as the living embodiment of the oppressive policies they were fighting against. For them, assassinating her would serve as both an act of vengeance and a major strategic victory against the British state. The leadership of the IRA started to formulate a plan to strike directly at the Prime Minister herself. Instead of a conventional shooting or a roadside explosive, the IRA opted for a far more intricate approach. Their plan was to attack at a moment when the entire British political elite would be gathered in a single vulnerable location, the Conservative Party conference in Brighton, scheduled for October of 1984. High-ranking cabinet members, key party figures, and Thatcher herself were all booked to stay at the Grand Hotel on the seafront. The man chosen for this critical mission was an IRA operative named Patrick Magee. Though born in Belfast, Magee had spent most of his life in England before returning to his birthplace at 18 and joining the Provisional IRA shortly after. He had previously been held for more than 2 years without trial, under suspicion of being involved with paramilitaries. Magee was a skilled member of the England Department, a specialized IRA unit responsible for carrying the conflict directly onto English soil. He was known to be a ruthless operator and had already participated in a London-based IRA cell that set off 2 car bombs. He was the one selected to assemble and plant the explosive device. The IRA had been meticulously developing its plan to attack the Prime Minister for a considerable time. Operatives had observed previous party conferences to learn the movements of government officials and had surveyed the hotel, even bringing in a construction engineer to analyze the Grand's structural layout. On the 15th of September, Magee registered at the hotel under the alias Roy Walsh, a name borrowed from another IRA bomber who had attacked the Old Bailey Courthouse. He booked room 629 on the 6th floor, believing it was the suite Thatcher would most likely occupy. While staying there, Magee received visits from 2 female IRA couriers who supplied him with the essential components for the bomb. He also had a meeting with an enigmatic figure known only as the Pope, whose exact involvement in the plot remains murky. Over the following 3 days, McGee built a sophisticated bomb using gelignite explosive and a long delay timer crafted from the parts of a videocassette recorder. He concealed the device behind a bathtub panel in room 629, carefully wrapped it in plastic wrap to mask its scent, and then checked out of the hotel. For almost a full month, the bomb sat hidden and undetected, its timer silently counting down as the hotel went about its business, serving countless other guests. As the conference approached, the Sussex police did conduct a security sweep of the hotel in preparation for Thatcher's arrival. But their search was superficial at best. Their main concern wasn't a bomb. Thatcher's government had also angered the nation's coal miners, so authorities were far more worried about the possibility of striking miners storming the hotel to protest. Thatcher was scheduled to be in the Napoleon suite on the first floor, and while a police sniffer dog was brought in to check that level, none of the other floors were ever inspected. The device was planted without anyone noticing, so Thatcher and her cabinet settled into the hotel, completely oblivious to the threat lurking within its walls. On the evening of October 11th, the conference had already been underway for 3 full days. Prime Minister Thatcher was up late in her suite's lounge, preparing for the major speech she was scheduled to deliver the following morning. After a grueling day of political meetings, most ministers and delegates were sound asleep in their beds. Then, at precisely 2:54 in the morning on October 12th, the explosion happened. Those who made it out alive would later recall the explosion as a deafening roar, immediately followed by the terrifying feeling of the entire structure collapsing in on itself. They were jolted awake into a world of pitch-black darkness and thick dust, with no way of knowing if the building was still coming down around them. Both hotel guests and employees recounted scenes of absolute chaos and devastation. Some survivors said it felt like an earthquake, with beds shaking violently and furniture being hurled across their rooms. Others remember hearing the chilling sound of brick and mortar smashing through the levels beneath them. The blast ripped a huge hole through the hotel's upper levels, causing an entire vertical section of the building to give way. Walls were blown apart, ceilings came crashing down, and rubble rained through several floors of the hotel. The explosion compromised the integrity of the chimney, sending the massive 5-ton structure plummeting down, smashing through several stories of the hotel. Inside room 629 was Sir Donald Maclean, the head of the Scottish Conservative Party. He was there with his wife, Muriel. The couple was in bed when the explosion hit, leaving them horribly injured and pinned beneath the wreckage. In the adjacent room were Sir Gordon Shattuck, a prominent chairman within the Tory party, along with his wife, Jeanie. The explosion tore through the wall that separated their rooms, catching them directly in its path. Jeanne was hit by flying shards of ceramic tiles that acted like shrapnel, tearing her body apart and taking off her head. In what can only be described as a miracle, Sir Gordon survived the fall through the disintegrating floors, eventually landing in the hotel's basement. Sir Anthony Berry, a Conservative member of Parliament with a 2-decade-long career in the House of Commons, was another casualty of the attack. Only moments before the explosion, Thatcher had been inside her bathroom. If she had remained in the bathroom, which took a direct hit, it is almost certain she would have been killed or severely wounded. That 5-ton chimney stack crashed through the ceiling and landed directly in her bathroom, but fate had her in the lounge, where she was still at work. In the aftermath of the explosion, she and her husband Dennis managed to leave their suite unharmed. Her security team and aides quickly got her out of the hotel and took her to a nearby police station for her protection, where she started getting reports on the number of casualties. The explosion and the subsequent collapse of the building directly resulted in the deaths of 5 individuals. Another 34 people sustained injuries, with many of them pinned beneath the debris for hours as rescue crews worked to free them. One of the most prominent survivors was Cabinet Minister Norman Tebbit, who found himself buried alive under the wreckage. His wife Margaret was also trapped alongside him. She suffered a severe neck injury that would leave her with a permanent disability. Emergency crews worked for hours, digging by hand through the pancaked floors of the hotel, hoping to reach anyone still trapped inside. Witnesses later spoke of hearing faint cries for help coming from underneath piles of concrete and splintered wood. Some, like Muriel Maclean, were not as fortunate. Although she was pulled from the wreckage alive, she succumbed to her injuries a short time later. Not long after the attack, the Provisional IRA released a statement taking credit for the bombing, acknowledging by then that their main target had escaped. Their communiqué was chillingly direct. It said the IRA was responsible for setting off 100 pounds of gelignite in Brighton, targeting the British cabinet and whom they called Tory warmongers. The message continued, stating that Thatcher would now understand that Britain could not simply occupy their country, abuse their prisoners, and kill their people on their own streets without consequence. They admitted, "Today, we did not have luck on our side," but they issued a grim warning. "Remember, we only need to get lucky one time. You will need to be lucky every time. Grant Ireland peace, and the conflict will end." This declaration was a clear reflection of the IRA's long-game strategy of relentless pressure. Despite Thatcher's survival, the attack sent a powerful message. The highest levels of British leadership were not safe, even on their own soil. Later on that very same day, Thatcher announced that the Conservative Party conference would proceed as planned, though it would be moved to a different location. This move was meant to be a show of defiance, proving that the government's determination could not be broken by an act of terror. In a speech delivered that day, she fiercely condemned the bombing and doubled down on her government's firm stance on Northern Ireland and its counter-terrorism policies. Consequently, the attack failed to achieve the political concessions the IRA might have been aiming for. In fact, it had the opposite effect, solidifying the British government's position and sending a clear message that violence would never change state policy. The next phase, of course, was the official investigation into the bombing. Forensic teams began to meticulously examine bomb fragments, sift through intelligence reports, and scrutinize the hotel's guest list. Meanwhile, police painstakingly combed through the debris, hunting for any clue that could lead them to the person who planted the bomb. By examining the blast site, police were able to pinpoint the exact room where the bomb had been planted, which led them to the alias McGee had used. Sifting through the debris, investigators discovered a partial palm print on the room's registration card. That print turned out to be a perfect match for McGee, whose records were already on file from a prior arrest. In June of 1985, authorities descended on an apartment in Glasgow, arresting McGee and 4 other IRA operatives who were in the middle of planning a wave of attacks across England. A year later, McGee was found guilty for his role in the Brighton bombing and was handed 8 life sentences to be served concurrently. However, in 1999, he walked free under the terms of the Good Friday Agreement. This accord permitted the early release of specific paramilitary inmates to advance the peace process in Northern Ireland. Following his release, McGee developed an unlikely connection with Jo Barry, the daughter of Sir Anthony Barry. For years, Jo had been consumed by grief and rage over her father's murder, and she felt compelled to understand the political and human reasons behind the act of terror that took his life. In the year 2000, not long after McGee was out of prison, she reached out to him through a third party. Eventually, they arranged to meet in person. While their initial encounter was private and carefully arranged, they have since shared their journey publicly, using their story to champion restorative justice. For some, especially other victims of IRA attacks, their relationship remains a source of controversy. But for Jo, the connection helped her forge something positive from her tragedy, while allowing McGee to fully confront the consequences of his actions. Their dialogues often tackle difficult and uncomfortable subjects like forgiveness, tolerance, and empathy, none of which have simple answers. The bombing of the Brighton Hotel stands as one of the most audacious assassination plots ever launched against a British head of government. Although Thatcher escaped unharmed, the sheer devastation left in the bomb's wake was a chilling reminder of how narrowly she had survived. The attack served as a stark wake-up call to the British establishment, exposing its vulnerability in an era defined by persistent paramilitary warfare. Music,